Hey Lee, how's it going? Can you hear me okay? Let's see here. Unmute. Are you able to hear me? No, okay. Oh, no.
Hey everybody, I'm Lee Moser. I'm an Agriculture Extension Associate with the Department of Biosystems and Agricultural Engineering here at the University of Kentucky. I am presenting for your Farm Start program today, a presentation that was prepared by Dr. Amanda Gumbert, who is a UK Extension Specialist for Water Quality. The title of the presentation, as you can see, is Kentucky Agriculture Water Quality Plans and Soil Conservation. So we're going to talk a little bit today about how water and soil and your operation all go together. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in, and I'll have a video about halfway through to break up my talking. And at the end, I'll have contact information if you have questions for either Dr. Gumbert or myself. Thanks, and I hope everyone's well. All right, see if I can get this slide to advance. We're still all new to this. Oh no, there we go. So this is the statement that we kind of want to open up with and get you all to start thinking about, is that water is the most critical resource issue of our lifetime and our children's lifetime. The health of waters is the principal measure of how we live on the land. And it's all connected. And another point that we'll make here shortly is that if it's on the ground, if it's in the soil, it's going to be in the water. So why should you care about water quality? First of all, clean water is better for you. We're all told to drink copious amounts of water. Clean water is where it's at. We don't want any toxins coming into what we're consuming, and there are ways that we can try to prevent that as we plan both residential, commercial, and agricultural operations. There's somebody enjoying a nice clean glass of water. Clean water is better for your family. I don't know about you, but growing up, this could have been me. You know, I spent a lot of my time growing up in and around creeks, enjoying the waterways, and being in a waterway or having your children in a waterway with pollution or trash just isn't very appealing. And then in the bottom right, we see an image that might make you think of the Flint water crisis. Don't poison our kids. So one thing we want to be concerned about is drinking water protection and what might be going into the water. So one of the issues that you may hear a lot about, and is another reason that you should care about water quality, are harmful algal blooms. And these happen on all sorts of scales, and we'll discuss that a little bit more. Could be an algal bloom in your farm pond, could range all the way to something in a lake or a river. So these cost money to treat, and they have real economic consequences for people downriver. An example of this might be having to shut down a water system because the prevalence of toxins in the water is just too much to treat. So that becomes a huge problem. And that's all related to excess nutrients in the water, especially lakes and ponds where water is stagnant. So you see these kind of green sheens on the surface of the water. There's all sorts of algae that you might see, or various aquatic vegetation in your ponds, but the harmful ones generally look like a green sheen or slick of paint on top of your pond or lake. It would be good to consider this effect if you're thinking about nutrients and soil and water and how they all interact. And last but not least is that clean water is protected by the law. So there are various federal and state regulations that mandate basically clean water for drinking. And we're going to talk a little bit about how Kentucky has addressed some of those needs for clean water through legislation here in the next little bit. So just kind of from 30,000 feet, this is what the Mississippi watershed looks like. And we're all likely viewing this in Kentucky, possibly elsewhere. So we're in the Ohio River Basin, and our neighbors and all the other parts of the Mississippi River Basin, we share a common drainage that ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. And that's important, as I mentioned earlier, because what we do and what we put on the ground interacts with water, and over course time ends up being transported and passed on to those downstream. And then it can end up causing issues like the Gulf of Mexico hypoxic zone that you may or may not have heard about. This is an image of a mixing zone where one part of the water is anoxic and the other is basically normal. And I say the word anoxic, that means very low levels of oxygen or lacking oxygen. And this happens when we have excess nutrient in the water, which causes algal blooms. And then in the algae's life cycle, when it dies, the decomposition process causes a very large oxygen demand in the water, which basically removes large quantities of oxygen that are dissolved in the water column that would normally be available for fish or any other aquatic organisms that would be in the area. And then we get the dead zone. And the dead zone changes in size from year to year. This is just a snapshot of 2017. 8,776 square miles of dead zone. And this was the largest measured size to date since the standardized mapping cruises began in 1985. So it ebbs and flows each year, and the practices that we implement on our properties impact how this changes over time. And I mentioned this statement earlier, but this is a take home that is always good to keep in mind. If it's on the ground, it's in our water, and that goes with any kind of property, whether it's commercial, residential, or agricultural. Just something that's always good to keep in mind. So in Kentucky specifically, one of the things that we boast is that we have 90,000 miles of streams and rivers. So that means that our landscape is dissected by streams, rivers of all sizes, and basically we live in intimate contact with waterways no matter what we do. So it's always important to keep that in mind. So some statistics, everyone loves statistics, but this is what the Kentucky Division of Water put together in their latest integrated report from 2014. What they do is they go out and assess stream health with various metrics. A lot of biological water quality parameters are concerned with what's able to live in the water, what uses does it support. So what they found was that 49% of the assessed stream miles that they were able to get out and assess do not support aquatic life. And what they found is the most common pollutant was sediment. So how does sediment get in water? We may not have good ground cover. We experience erosion, and it runs off into waterways in suspension with the water and is transported into our waterways where it deposits and clogs up all the little places where bugs like to live that feed the fish and start the food chain. Another issue that they found is that 71% of assessed stream miles do not support primary contact recreation. So that image that we saw the young man playing in the creek, this might speak to that. You might not want to go and jump in a creek if it doesn't have very good water quality and go for a swim. And 33% of assessed stream miles do not support secondary contact recreation, which would include boating, wading, or fishing. all things that I personally love to do, and I'd hate to think that going out and doing these activities might make me sick. So in Kentucky, we have some special concerns that we like to call sensitive areas. Sensitive areas could be a lot of things in a landscape. Could be a creek, but specifically what we're going to talk about are groundwater connections, which would be sinkholes or very porous soil or wells. And in Kentucky, we have karst regions, and quite often water essentially short circuits sitting in the soil profile and goes right through a sinkhole and into the local groundwater. So it's important to consider the impact that this characteristic of our landscape can have on transporting potential pollutants into our waterways. And this is just an image, a map showing the regions of Kentucky and the karst potential that they have. Karst is a word that relates the potential for an area that's, in our case, underlain by limestone to develop into sinkholes and conduits where surface and groundwater can rapidly interact. So in the central bluegrass region where I'm at in Lexington, you can see we're in an area of high potential for karst. And if you go out on any farm or just, really even here in the city, you can see evidence of sinkholes. There's a very large one nearby that drains part of the water that comes off campus. So up in northern Kentucky, where I'm imagining a lot of you are, you have an interspersed area in the outer bluegrass region with some mixed areas of lesser potential for karst, but the potential is still there for sinkholes even in northern Kentucky. So considering sinkholes and how what you're doing on the ground could interact with those is always an important consideration. And this is what it could look like when you have a sinkhole interacting with surface water. This is what we'd call a swallet. This is essentially a sinkhole that's formed in a stream channel on an operation, and it's dumping right into the local groundwater. And that could be the source for drinking water somewhere downstream or within ground watershed or basin. And this is a really common site, sinkhole formation in a field. And we'll talk about some strategies that we can implement to address some of these things. And when we talk about sensitive areas and we talk about interactions with some of the things that we do on the ground, here's somebody doing something that a lot of people are used to doing, spreading manure on the cornfield, and it's right next to a sinkhole. So we're going to talk about observing setbacks and potentially implementing some buffers as best management practices here in the next little bit. My dog just came to visit. Sorry if you hear any noise in the background. So the legislation and laws that govern water quality in agriculture in Kentucky can be summed up through the Kentucky Agriculture Water Quality Act. It was a law that was passed in 1994 and became what we know it as today in 2001. And it mandates that any property engaged in agriculture or forestry of 10 or more acres must develop a water quality plan. And we've got some tools to help you with that, some extension materials to explain what all these different best management practices are. And we have some ways to help you plan and develop an ag water quality plan through these materials. I'm going to give you an overview of them today and share resources for how you can either do it yourself in terms of the planning or get with a resource professional to assist you. So once again, who needs a plan? Anyone farming or raising trees on 10 or more acres. And if you want to apply for various cost share programs, it's going to be a requirement. Specific cost share programs that you may be engaged or interested in engaging in include state cost share, which is the Kentucky Soil Erosion and Water Quality Cost Share Program. You hear EQIP a lot. That's the NRCS program, Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And then at the county level, you'll hear CAPE a lot, which is the Governor's Office of Ag Policies County Agricultural Investment Program. So lots of acronyms, but the bottom line is you need a plan to get involved in these programs, and it's going to help you with your operation as well. So here's a question. What is a plan? A plan is something that helps you to achieve a goal. You set forth what you're planning to do, how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, and when you're going to do it. And that sums up the basics of what an agriculture water quality plan is. It's a list of BMPs to be implemented on your farm to protect water quality and soil as well. So there are 6 general categories of best management practices that are covered within the Ag Water Quality Plan. That includes livestock best management practices, as well as crops, pesticides and fertilizers, farmstead, forestry, streams and other waters. And you'll see how this plays out as we work through the remainder of the presentation. And it's important that as your operation changes, you keep up to date. It can be a very valuable management and operation tool, so that just goes hand in hand, keeping it up to date. So you might ask, well, how do I develop a plan? And I alluded to it earlier. We've developed a web-based tool that's essentially a fillable PDF that's accessible on a university website. I'll share the URL to that shortly. There's also a printed document that's mirror of that format, just a hard copy. And then you can reach out to your local conservation district or perhaps your extension agent in the county and try to initiate the process through them. So these are the 2 URLs on University of Kentucky hosted websites that will get you to the fillable PDF that we've developed, or you could print a hard copy off of here. And there's all sorts of tools and extension publications and general inspirational or guidance items that you might find useful as you work through a water quality plan. So here's a screen capture of what the website looks like. This is where you'll land if you follow one of those URLs, and you'll essentially click on the link as you see in the highlighted red oval there to download the planning tool. When you open it up, this is what you're going to see. This is your cover image, and you'll start from here. So it's a 53-page document is what it looks like, but don't let that overwhelm you. It's basically a way to document information about your farm and plan what and where you would like to address potential soil and water resource concerns. So it starts off basically by asking the question, do you need an agricultural water quality plan? And you follow the guidance here, and if you own 10 or more acres in Kentucky and you're engaged in farming or timber production, the answer to both of those is going to be yes. So you need to go ahead and proceed through the workbook, fill in some information on your farm, as you see with some of the information that Dr. Gumbert has shared in this example. And then you'll proceed into the first of the 6 sections, which is crops, and you'll follow the prompts. And if you do grow crops, you'll start going through the best management practices that you currently have implemented on your property or ones that you plan to implement on your property. And it looks like there's quite a suite here, and we won't cover all these today, but we're going to cover a subset of some of these as we go through the presentation today. So we've also left you notes areas so that you can make comments that are important to what you're thinking as you're going through this. Just fillable text boxes that you can utilize, and then as you save the document, it'll save your notes. And here's the livestock section, and this is circled basically to point out that these are two really critical aspects of a livestock operation: nutrient management and dead animal disposal, that need to be paid attention to in a special manner, because generally when individuals end up having regulatory issues in agriculture on a livestock operation, it's complaint driven. And these are the two areas that have been found to be most commonly complained about by neighbors or people that are passing by. Nutrient runoff into waterways from excess manure or bare soil, or improper disposal of dead animals. So things to be aware of as you're beginning your new farm operation, and start thinking about how these ideas or concepts impact water quality. And we've also included, as you see here in one of the notes from the forestry section, helpful that will prompt you and guide you and give you a little bit more information on some of these more cryptic sections of the Ag Water Quality Plan that we commonly get questions about. And this is kind of the summary section that pulls in all the best management practices that you identified as you go through the fillable form. This is what it looks like when everything's blank in the workbook, and then it pulls all that information in, and you can actually go in and identify by field number, if your fields are numbered, where things are located. And one thing I always recommend, and is really helpful to resource professionals when you're communicating with them or inviting them onto your operation, is to map these things if at all possible. So there's a lot of really good low cost or free mapping software out there that you could visually put these things on a map, and it could potentially help you with your management and with your correspondences with other resource professionals. And this is just highlighting the sections that someone identified that they are either currently implementing or planning to implement on their farm. And this is the certification at the end. This basically is saying that everything that's in this document is accurate, all that sort of stuff, and then you'd end up getting this on file with your conservation district. That way, when you go to apply for cost share programs, they can say, yes, you have an up-to-date ag water quality plan, and we're able to work with you in this cost share program potentially. And I alluded to this earlier, the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Act is mainly enforced through complaints that are reported to the Kentucky Division of Water, and then a standard corrective measures procedure process is followed. So if it looks bad from the road, that's generally when the regulatory folks end up getting called and have issues with water quality that are potentially actionable. So I'm going to break up some of my talk here with a video that I want to share with you. And I am going to try to transition over. I've already got it queued up. So bear with me for just a moment as I try to share this other screen. So this is a producer that Dr. Gumbert worked with, and he's fairly well known throughout the state for his operation. I'm going to let him tell you a little bit more about it, but he's going to tell you about how an ag water quality plan really helped him shape his operation as a new farmer. So I think you should be able to see the video now. Michelle, can you confirm? Can you see a video screen instead of my face of the presentation?
Still got a black screen here. It might just take a little bit to load. Okay, it's starting to come up now. If you could turn up the volume, that'd be good.
John and Sylvia Benarski own and manage Sherwood Acres Farm, a 50-head belted Galloway.
I was a beginning farmer, grew up in Vermont, had shown cattle in the county fair, dairy cattle for my uncle. But
It's a little faintly. I can always attach this video link to the email.
That sounds good.
Okay, let's plan to do that
John
then.
and Sylvia Benarski own and manage Sherwood Acres Farm, a 50-head belted Galloway beef operation in Oldham County, Kentucky.
Our district conservationist, Kurt Mason, been with NRCS for almost 40 years now. He told me that the things that I did on my farm were going to affect my neighbors, were going to affect my community. And since Heron's Creek is a tributary to the Ohio River, it's going to affect the water source of metropolitan Louisville. And over the years, it's almost kind of
And the sound and the video aren't playing at the same time, Lee. So do you want to continue your presentation and I can send this link separately to that video?
Yeah, sorry, I thought it might work.
Yeah, that's all right. I think it's just taking a little bit to load. So, but I
Okay.
can send it with the email so everybody can watch it.
So everyone, this just goes back to being adaptable, learning as we're doing, trying to offer these presentations for you. Michelle is going to share the video link with you, and it's also within the presentation on one of the slides. It's definitely worth taking a look at, so please do so when you get an opportunity. I'm going to switch back to the presentation now. So there it is. All right, I'm going to move right on. So I'm just going to talk about some of the best management practices that you may choose to implement on your farm that are included in the workbook for the Ag Water Quality Plan. Here are a couple common livestock best management practices that might be good to implement on your property. You have a planned grazing system, which includes rotational grazing, your forages to reduce overgrazing and keep ground cover, healthy forages, reduce compaction and erosion, and help to manage winter feeding or poor muddy conditions. Proper grazing use alludes to matching the density of animals that you bring on your property to the forage base. So making sure that there's enough forage to sustain what you put on the property without overgrazing and getting into an erosion system again. And all these address both water quality and soil conservation. Another BMP that is really important, especially with all of our waterways here in Kentucky, is riparian area protection. And riparian is a word that just basically alludes to the areas alongside a stream where trees and vegetation grows, and these serve as really good filters. We know that if we provide a certain distance of buffer back off the stream and step back a little bit and have dense vegetation and trees with deep roots protecting our stream banks, we can improve water quality and protect that resource. And this is just a conceptual drawing of a stream with a buffer zone and perhaps a wetland or a riparian forest next to it. And in the areas outside of that, you might have cattle grazing, or you may have a cornfield, and that buffer zone helps to keep whatever manure or nutrients that may be present on the ground that are coming from either your livestock or fertilization of crops where we want them and out of the stream. And this is an actual image from one of UK's research farms of a riparian area protection that was installed as part of a demonstration paddock to show off a bunch of different practices that we've implemented. These are equine paddocks around the stream. And this is what you can get, and I'm sure everyone's driven by a stream bank with a high cut bank like this when the forages are closely grazed and there's very little deep-rooted vegetation to hold the stream banks stable. Water is very powerful, and if it gets opportunity, it will cut right into your stream banks like this. And this is an alternative of what we would like to see as a protected stream bank with dense vegetation. And you'll notice fencing in the background that keeps the livestock from interacting directly with the waterway. We're going to show some strategies on how to implement that here shortly. The main best management practice that we recommend and have in our toolbox to address livestock interaction with streams, because sometimes they're going to need to cross the streams or potentially use them for watering, is a limited livestock access to streams by fencing with alternative water systems. So restricting their access to the streams reduces the potential for delivery of manure and nutrient from them directly into the waterway, and providing off stream watering systems like a watering fountain pumped with city water is a good option to lure them out of the stream area and protect water quality and potentially protect herd health. So this is what it looked like before we implemented limited access around the equine paddocks. And then this is the after. You notice that we saw some bare ground and horses with the ability to get right in the creek. And this is an option that provides them some protection by fencing them out normally. But when necessary, you could turn them through here. This is a heavy traffic pad that's essentially laying down into the banks of the stream to improve stability, reduce bare ground, and provide a solid surface that's resistant to both pressure and the power of water to allow for a safe crossing that protects water quality. And here are some cattle using it, or another example of it. And you saw the board fencing before. This is another option that people implement, is temporary fencing, T-posts, works well too. And some conceptual drawings here to share. A might be a completely open access stream. B is a gated stream crossing. And C alludes to a rotational grazing scheme, potentially with multiple pastures or paddocks, and you can rotate access across the creek or between the paddocks. They don't show gates between the paddocks on the ground, but you know, part of a scheme, part of a management plan. And then D shows a similar concept, but it also provides extra setbacks in certain areas that we know are flood prone. So it's always good to get out and observe your waterways during high flow conditions when you're planning a fencing system along them, to make sure that you're addressing the greatest extent of where you need to put your fencing system. And this is an aerial overview of what the best management practice paddock that we've implemented on our farm here in Lexington looks like. We've implemented enhanced buffer areas, which would be the riparian area protection that we mentioned. We've stabilized some erosional features that formed in the field over time from excess water flowing across ground that was not densely vegetated all year round by installing an erosion control structure. You see that in the orange. And we were fortunate, and this is one of the benefits of having shallow groundwater or a karst system in your property. You may have a spring that could serve as a great alternative water source. And this system in specific was tapped into in a shallow groundwater system. And then it was plumbed down to an alternative water. So this was able to provide us with an opportunity to no longer have livestock directly watering from the creek and utilizing a system that's back up out of the floodplain with a buffer in between it and the waterway. And then we've got our gated stream crossing that we saw earlier in the purple down in the central bottom part of the image. So this is a map, just like any other map you might see, but this is the kind of map that I would consider useful, you know, when you're building your ag water quality plan. Another part of an ag water quality plan, and this is one of the best management practices, there's a listing for it under livestock and crop because there are nutrient concerns with both. It's nutrient management planning, and this looks like a dairy lagoon here in this image. So I'm going to talk a little bit about nutrient management plans and how they relate to the Kentucky Ag Water Quality Plan. And specifically, as I mentioned, it's in both the livestock and crop sections to address nutrient management issues in both a livestock operation and a cropping operation. And there can be some overlap between the two. As shown in this image, which we saw earlier as well. This is somebody who's managing both livestock and crops and using the livestock manure to fertilize their cornfields. And this is one of the other items that we talked about a little bit earlier when we talked about complaints and what may get you a visit from a regulator as dead animal disposal or proper animal disposal. Acceptable methods for carcass disposal include incineration, boiling, burying at least 100 feet from streams, rivers, sinkholes, wells, springs, public highways, residences, or stables, removal by a rendering company, landfilling, or composting. So we've got some material out there related to the majority of these topics. In specific, you'll see the on-farm composting of animal mortalities publication down in your bottom right. So these are all options, but it's good to have a plan for when unexpected events hit. And it's not that livestock mortalities are necessarily unexpected. We know that when we have livestock, there are going to be some percentage of mortalities. It's just planning for when that happens. What are we going to do? And this is something I've been working on quite a bit over the past couple of years is stormwater management. Basically diverting clean water out of your production areas and avoiding contamination of that stormwater with nutrient that might come from manure and the potential to transport any pathogens that could be in manure as well. And the main methods for implementing stormwater management are using gutters and downspouts just to direct water away from production areas and then discharging it into a protected area that's preferably densely vegetated so that you don't have a big erosional feature form right below the outlet of your stormwater system. And then this is just a set of images that shows what it's talking about. Basically doing what you might see on your home and getting water away from the foundation of your barn and getting out of the area that interacts with manure, fertilizer, agrochemicals, anything that might potentially be picked up in water and transported downstream to all those neighbors that we saw in our greater watersheds earlier in the presentation. And then this is just an idea for beneficial reuse that a lot of people are getting into these days is water harvesting for either livestock consumption or other non-potable, which refers to non-human consumption uses. So this water might be able to get you through a situation where the city water lines burst and you have some thirsty cattle, something of that nature. Or you could incorporate it into a more normal part of your scheme, and then, yeah. And this is just a conceptual drawing of what filter strips are like. There are many different types of filter strips. This shows two. This shows a densely forested timber filter strip. And on the other side, between the crop ground and the stream or ditch, is basically a grass filter strip. And these are really important for basically serving as a scrubber or a sponge to gather some of the nutrients and any other potential pollutants that might come off of a production area and capture them, keep them out of the waterways. And we saw some of the sinkholes earlier. Implementing filter strips around sinkholes and providing a setback and fencing them off is another good way to address sinkholes. And this is a grassed waterway that's running right down the middle of a set of cornfields and some pasture there. So, more formal view of it. And this is just a densely vegetated area that we prefer water to drain through, and we know that with that dense vegetation, that turf that's there, it's going to reduce the amount of erosion we experience and take up some of that nutrient that might be coming off your cornfield. And this is just another image of the same thing. And cover cropping is another important practice that we can implement to reduce bare ground after a crop and reduce the amount of soil erosion that we experience. And it will also help take up some nutrients and hopefully put some organic matter back into your soil if you terminate it there on the spot. Another water quality item of concern when you're planning for your operation is the storage of pesticides and fertilizers, and there are very good guidelines set forth that you could follow, such as locating new storage facilities a minimum of 100 feet away from on-site wells or sinkholes. We know that if chemicals get into the water by being on the ground, they can easily be transported into wells or sinkholes, and then that can become problematic. And we want to keep them 200 feet away from minimum from private domestic wells, springs, cisterns, and 400 feet from open-throated sinkholes and perennial streams. So this might be something that you could work up on a map when you're planning where to store various agrochemicals. And it's good practice to store fertilizers and pesticides separately from one another and from foodstuffs and feeds for cross-contamination purposes. Mixing, loading, and handling of pesticides and fertilizers is a critical concern. It's one of the best management practices that we cover here within the Ag Water Quality Plan. The key components of addressing this are following label requirements, following applicator regulations for restricted use pesticides. So get your trainings that are necessary for restricted use pesticide application so that you're aware of all the precautions you need to be following when applying pesticides, as well as any planning considerations that you need to implement into your plan. And the use of backflow prevention techniques for mixing and getting your chemical ready to apply your pesticides. Here's some recommendations. Avoid mixing or loading within label required distances of wells, open-throated sinkholes, perennial streams, or lakes. Proper disposal of containers of pesticides is also an important consideration. And then there's a program in the state basically advocating the 3 R's of ag pesticide container management. It's rinse, return, and recycle, and dispose of non-returnable containers according to label directions. And if you have any questions on this, you can always contact your cooperative extension service or conservation district. But some of the things you should never do include just dumping or burning these containers. And that's about the summary of that. And applying pesticides, you know, you're going to want to obtain any certifications necessary if it's a restricted use pesticide, but you'll always want to follow all pesticide label requirements. The label directions are federal law and enforceable by Kentucky Department of Agriculture. And always use backflow prevention techniques when mixing or loading any kind of application equipment. And this intersection, some pretty dense legalese, but it's alluding to the fact that you need the appropriate certifications to apply pesticides if it's of a certain category. So follow the guidance associated with restricted use pesticide certification. And this is just an example of a label from historically commonly used restricted use pesticide atrazine. And it warns, like we've alluded to throughout the presentation, due to ground and surface water concerns, it's a restricted use pesticide because it can easily find its way into water systems and persist there and do damage to aquatic organisms and potentially human health. Getting into the farmstead section of the Ag Water Quality Act, Ag Water Quality Plan Workbook, this is a pretty common thing that you'll run into is just septic system and on-disposal systems. Each county has a health department to contact and address issues of septic system certifications and planning. They would be a great contact for you if you're planning a new system. There are professionals out there that help with maintenance and installation. They can provide you with a list of those professionals in your area. And in general, UK recommends pumping these systems every 3 to 5 years. And one of the best ways that you can protect your system is to avoid introducing things into it that shouldn't be in there, things that aren't going to break down in your system, and basically reducing the amount of water that enters your septic system as much as possible. And that'll help extend the life of your system. And this ultimately, as it shows in the schematic or conceptual drawing to the left, anything that leaches out of your septic system could potentially find its way down into the groundwater. And this is a forestry best management practice. If you have any potential logging plans on your operation, research has identified that it's important to keep a strip of woods adjacent to your streams that run through your property. And this goes back to some of the slides we saw earlier that deep-rooted dense vegetation like trees and bushes and shrubs and all the other vegetation you might find in a forested riparian area do a good job of holding soil in place and filtering out some of the sediment and potential contaminants that may be coming from other areas of your operation that you may be planning to manage for forestry. And we get back to, again, here in the forestry section, management of areas around sinkholes, sinking streams, and caves. And again, we're going to want to try to reduce runoff from any roads, trails, landings that may be adjacent to these sensitive features, and implement buffer areas to try to capture anything that might be running off. And this is back to the image of sinkholes that we saw earlier. I could envision setting back a certain distance off of this, allowing vegetation to grow up, perhaps some deeper rooted vegetation, and just fencing it off. That might be constituted as a loss of pasture, but it could also protect your investment from livestock wandering into the area. And then it could also reduce the risk from potential groundwater contamination. So I'm going to sum it up in about 6 simple steps on ways that you can protect water quality on your operation or your planned operation. Develop and implement an ag water quality plan, which we talked a lot about today. You can implement a nutrient management plan. A nutrient management plan is essentially matching your soil testing results with the nutrient content of any fertilizers or manures that you're planning to apply on your property and the demand for crop or pastures. And it's matching the right source, rate, time, and place where you apply these products. And implementing a soil testing plan. This isn't a formalized thing like the nutrient management plan or ag water quality plan concept, but a soil testing plan in my mind is something more than just taking one soil sample and considering that representative of your entire property. If different parts of your property are managed differently, if you have pastures broken down into different fields, consider taking representative samples from each different area that's managed in different ways and forming your management plans based off of that information as opposed to one representative sample could go a long way. Installing stream buffers is a great way to protect water quality. We talked about handling farm chemicals wisely. And we also mentioned properly disposing of dead animals. One of the things that most often gets complaints. So these are simple steps to protect water quality on your planned farm. And another benefit is that implementing Ag Water Quality Act best management practices can save you time, save you money, prevent soil erosion, and protect water sources. A couple of options for help for farmers. You're very familiar with your county extension agent if you're watching this video. And you've also got your conservation district staff there in the county. And then this is the URL that will take you to the resources and the Ag Water Quality Plan workbook that we've been talking about today. So we want you to visit this website if time allows and check out the resources that we have available for you for water quality planning on your operation. And since this is a non-traditional format, if you have questions, feel free to relay them either through Michelle or feel free to reach out to us at the email addresses and phone numbers below, and we'll be happy to correspond with you on any questions or assistance you may need. On a side note, I mentioned nutrient management planning multiple times throughout the presentation. The College of Agriculture, Food and Environment also employs a nutrient management planner. Her name is Tammy Barnes. She would be another person to potentially reach out to, and I can put you in contact with her if you need help developing a nutrient management plan. So that is the extent of what I've prepared to share with you today. I thank you for your time and patience with the non-traditional format, and I hope this has been useful. And check out the video that I tried to share that just wasn't working out so well. I think it could be inspirational and get you thinking. And I wish you all the best of luck as you move forward. Thanks, and have a great day.
Thanks so much, Lee.